Okay, we want to talk about advanced animation functions within Vizrt T5. Touched on basic animation functionality on a previous video. Now there are a few additional things that we need to know about our animations that will make your life a bit easier. I have a scene open. We're going to rotate this cube 360 degrees. To do that, I've got my timeline set to 0. I've got my rotation here at 0. I'm going to set a keyframe. My timeline advances automatically. Now I'm going to type in my rotation parameters to 360. I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm going to hit set keyframe, and here you can see that it created an animation down here. I can grab my keyframes anywhere and click and drag these out or in to shorten it or lengthen it. Same, we can click on the director to shorten it or lengthen it, and we can grab our first keyframe to place it anywhere within the stage. And if you click between the animation as well, you can click and drag that anywhere. Alright, pulling this smaller will make it a quicker animation. Dragging it out will make it a longer animation. And you have your timeline down here to tell you that. Now we have two animation keyframes in between it. If we click on that bar, it opens up a new window here. This is our loop in and our loop out functions. First off, you notice the loop in is grayed out, and for that to happen we would actually need an offset. So if I click on my cube container within our stage, we have an offset here, and if I offset that, then we'll be able to use our loop and swing parameter on the in. But we have our loop out and our swing out. So the way that this works is, number one, I'm going to turn on our loop out, and you can see that it creates a gray bar here, and it has a light gray button here representing our keyframe. As I increase this number here, you can see that it adds another one. So this is how many times you want it to loop and or swing. We have a reset button right there. There's an infinity button, so it will go infinity. What happens when I hit this is that it's going to play the animation. As it approaches the end keyframe, it's going to slow down, but then speed up again and continue this for infinity, since we have it infinity. Now what's the difference between loop and swing? If we turn the swing button on, this is going to go back the other way when it reaches that keyframe. So it reaches the end, now it turns around and goes back the other way. If we turn the swing off, it's just going to go one way. So since this is the rotation, we also have three splines. We have a spline 1, a spline 2, and a spline 3. And you can see within our view here, as we change through it, that we get different handles here. So since we animated on the Y, we want spline 2 here. As we select a keyframe, we get our spline and spline handles down here. And if you don't see that, you can change to either the dope sheet view, the spline view, or dope spline view. One of them is going to have your view in it. From here, it's all about adjusting our keyframes how we want it. So when we hit play, this thing eases in to the animation, and then it kind of eases into the other keyframe there. If we want to eliminate that and just have a smooth rotation, we would need to change these keyframes basically. Now I can click on it, and we have an option here. We can use the spline here to grab the handle, drag it around however we want, or we could use these buttons up here where we have linear left and right, smooth left, linear right, and so on. In this particular case, since I wanted everything to be smooth and a fluid motion with no easing in or easing out of my keyframes, I'm going to make everything linear. So I'm going to click on my linear left and linear right keyframe, and you can see how that made that keyframe linear there. I'm going to click on my second keyframe, and this is the representation here. Again, I have a handle here that I can drag, but I'm just going to click it linear left and right. And now when I hit play, it starts with no ease in animation, and then it reaches that keyframe and it just keeps going. You didn't even notice the skip point. If we were to change some of these options here, we can change smooth left, linear right. It's going to kind of ease into that. Then you can see the keyframe here, so it slows down as it reaches the end of the animation. If we want to increase that even more, you can grab that spline handle and increase that curve there. Now as you press play, it starts out much faster and goes into the keyframe much slower. And you can go the other way too. We can grab it down, and now we hit play. It's going to start slow and go a little bit faster into the end of the keyframe. So there are a lot of variations you can make with your animations using these handles here. And remember, since this is the rotation, we'd also have to address that on our spline 1 axis and our spline 3 axis if we had animations on that. Now we should note that these spline handles down here are different from what we would call a path control or spline control. So if I have my bounding box on here, or you could select B for your bounding box, and we highlight our position down here in the animation, you can see that we have our path control here. We also have handles that we can control this path within the scene editor window, and we can grab this path and the handles and all that. So this animation path is different than these animation splines. But be aware, in any animation you can come up and make your adjustments within the scene editor window as well by grabbing these handles. And if we wanted to delete an animation anytime, you could either do it two ways. You could right click and delete position, or you could just grab that position by itself and drag that right to the trash can. As we mentioned in the basic animation tutorial, any variable can pretty much be animated within Vizrt T5. We have a cube here. So for instance, if we wanted to animate a particular part of this cube, we could. We have our cube options open here. I hit set keyframe, and if I wanted to adjust our tessellation of this, I could hit another keyframe, and that creates an animation down here. It tells us cube bevel, and then our keyframes are right here. So we could come in and we could delete our rotation animation and play, and now we just have a bevel animation on our cube. So any variable like that can be modified in geometry and or plugins. So for instance, if we had add plugins onto our container, we would then be able to animate that plugin on the container. I just dragged an alpha onto our container, and we could certainly set keyframes for this alpha to fade this geometry in or out as well. And here it creates our alpha animation down here. Now each animation we create has its own variables that we can adjust within the box down here. We have a name that you could just type in a name. We have a time, which will adjust the time of that keyframe, seconds, fields, or frames. Then we have a value, so this will change the value of that keyframe. And then these angles are all about the spline and the ease in and ease out. So if we wanted to reverse a keyframe at any time, for instance, this alpha or transparency starts out at 0 and goes to 100. If we wanted it to go the other way, we could just take the last keyframe and drag it past the first keyframe, or take the first keyframe, drag it past the last one. Either way, you are reversing it, and then when we come in and play again, you can see that it reversed that animation. It's now going the other way. So it's simple to just reverse an animation by sliding the keyframe. And as we mentioned, pretty much anything can be animated within Vizrt T. So here is a light, and if I wanted to animate this light, I could do it the same way. It's the same principle. I would just need to rewind my timeline. I set my keyframe where I want it, and then I move the variable. And let's move the light over there. We hit set keyframe, and then we hit play, and you can see that the light animates, and we have our options down here again to adjust it, to drag it out, make it the speed we want, and our options over here on the right to adjust all the variables. Now also, it's possible to create animations with two containers. So if I have a cube copied here, and I'm just going to reposition this and make a baby cube here like that. And now if we have two containers selected within our scene tree, we can actually animate them together. I'm going to set a keyframe, and you can see that our transformation is all highlighted blue, letting us know that two containers are highlighted. We can move this position of it. You hit set key, and now there's two animations on that. So we hit play, and you can see that we've animated them together. And we actually copied those animations as well. And if you needed to copy an animation, for instance, if we wanted to drag a brand new cube up into here, we could take this animation icon and just drag it onto that cube, and it's going to have the same parameters as our other cube. The only difference being that we don't have a texture on it, so it's just going to look blank. What's more, if you have an animation of something, you can actually save that animation, and that's all about our grouping. So if we liked this or had our cube animating in such a spectacular way that we needed to save it and reuse it, we could come up into our scene tree, we could group all of our containers, and then we could merge with actions and events, make one container and drag it down into our geometry to give it a name. And that would save all of the animations within our scene, and you can reuse it.